Hello and welcome to this Register webinar, the latest one on security this week, and we're going to be talking about the state of malware and the working title, Holding the Enterprise to Ransom. See what we did there? Hey, yeah, you like that? Yeah, very clever. So before we go on, I would emphasize that when we talk about enterprise, it's like enterprisey stuff, but it doesn't mean those really big companies, because malware and security in general, and malware in particular, is applicable to companies of all sizes, large and small, and smaller companies can be particularly affected by ransomware and other kinds of malware. So that's what we're here to talk about. I've got my little clicker here, so I'm going to move on and introduce the panel. And as I do, I just want to ask you, so James, first from Sophos, who are sponsoring this event very kindly, malware. Why are we still doing it? What's that about?
It's an excellent opening question and a big one. I've been at Sophos now for about 12 years. I spent a lot of time in the labs looking at interesting new malicious code and exploits and how cybercriminals are successfully snaring people into opening these things and running nasty code. And I think that the core of it is really that we face an intelligent adversary that knows exactly what our users are going to click on, that has excellent measurement of the things that allow them to get this code running, and that there has been a continuous supply of nasty new exploits to enable people to get into people's systems, continued failures on an ongoing basis. So I think at the core of it is really, some very simple old techniques that still work from 12 years ago to this very day.
And the adversary, is that people, or is that the software, or is that the mix? Is that?
Well, I mean, we're talking about essentially about cyber criminals, right? People. Although there's been some interesting changes in the makeup of those individuals over the years. I mean, you go back to kind of 10 years ago, and there was that stereotype of the cyber criminal as the spotty teenager sitting in their mum's basement cracking away at code. Where today, as I'm sure we'll discuss more, we're talking about really like organized criminal gangs and businesses selling products and services to each other. By any economist definition, an illicit market of people selling and enhancing their services to break into computers. Amazingly professional and organized.
So Tony, illustrious Tony Locke, I think I even said that last time, it's still illustrious. Tony Locke from Freeform Dynamics, so researching into this area. Yeah. Shouldn't we have solved this problem already?
We should have, but with a name like Locke, you'd have thought we would have.
Well,
but obviously we haven't. There's big people elements in here as well. So, yep, certainly it's become an industry now. Rather than individuals, and this marketplace is very dynamic, but it comes down to people and money. Is there a reason for doing this from the point of view of the cyber criminals? Yes, it's making money, and as long as there's money to be made, people will be targeted, and people are still really vulnerable to security because it's a challenge. It gets in people's way is sometimes the perception that we'll cover much later on.
Stick with that word security, because before we drill into the malware stuff, here's some data from you guys about security in general, which maybe you can help us kind of just see where this all fits together.
This is really just the big picture stuff before we start digging down into malware in particular. And you can see right at the top here that there's a lot of people issues, as I mentioned. Lack of user awareness is, incredibly high. Even today, after we've been talking about this, not for 12 years, but for even longer. Back in the days when I was still an IT pro, and that's, sort of 2.5, 3 decades ago, we were talking about security then, and there were very much people-related issues wrapped around it.
Those paper tapes needed securing as well, didn't they?
It was floppy disks as well, and
the actual floppy ones.
The floppy ones, yeah, the 5.25 jobs, yep. So,
yeah.
And people then wanted to say, well, how can we stop company data being removed, our customer lists. And so you come up with a simple reason to stop it. And strangely enough, quite often, some of the execs said, okay, we're not going to do that. The reason why they didn't want to do this particular project was because they were bringing in some stuff from home for their secretaries to format properly, use the expensive colour laser printer. That's how long ago this was, guys. To print off, the Lions Club newsletters in the days when that was expensive.
So it was getting in their way.
Yeah. They thought that now they'd suddenly have to bring this in an authorised fashion so that everybody would be aware of it. Of course, they thought at the time that I didn't know what was going on, which is naive in the extreme, but that's the point. There are lots of people issues here, all the way down to just neglect and irresponsibility. It's not as big. The malicious intent on the part of end users isn't that high, but just people making mistakes, people not knowing what they should do, what they shouldn't do, and finding things that get in the way and so working around them. If they don't understand why they shouldn't do something, if they're just told don't do it, people will find a way around it because it gets in their way and it takes them maybe 20 seconds longer. If they understand more about why not to do something, they change.
It's not with malicious intent necessarily.
No.
And I really wanted to underscore something that you hinted at there, and it hits up on your introduction as well, which is, you go from those days forwards, we're putting more and more information online with greater and greater value to all of us. So cybercriminals have not only been able to continue exploiting, goodies like financial information, but finding whole new avenues to profit from our data that we never really predicted before. And that means it truly impacts everyone, as you said, consumer, small business, enterprise, government, whoever you are, there is a way for cybercriminals to profit from your information.
They're just looking for weaknesses, aren't they? They're looking for holes. Like, for example, this hole
great
on
metaphor.
the desk. Yeah,
great
like
metaphor. I love the way you plugged it, though.
This is superb. We put a mug on it just to prove that you can put a mug on a hole, but we know that solving the hole problem is harder than that. And maybe we can extend that across to the malware situation and say, yeah, it's about exploiting weaknesses, isn't it? And any way that people can find a way of getting in, they will use that because it's easiest.
Right, so. And remember, it's an age-old adage in our industry. As defenders, we have to defend 1,000 doors every single day, every single time. An attacker only has to hit one of them once to be successful. And when you deal with the scale of the entire internet, when you deal with the sheer mass volume of legitimate websites that cybercriminals are hacking every single day to inject nasty little iframes and JavaScript to redirect to exploit code, they're targeting hundreds of thousands of users at once. A success rate of a tiny, tiny percentage that a marketing firm might be happy with on an email campaign is more than enough to make things interesting. And they tend to do a lot better than that still.
I love the way this says traditional phishing, like, it's an old one now. I remember new phishing.
Yeah, well, and some of those still work, right? The 419 scams, the Nigerian banker.
You still get email explicitly, people clicking on links in email from strange sources, or maybe it's got a bit more sophisticated at the crude level, where you just need to hover over the email address to see whether it really is from your friend in the first place. Yeah. But still, the old ways work.
Well, I remember one of the campaigns that I first saw when I joined Sophos was this Netsky P campaign, which is one that's been around for many years since. People still...
I have to interrupt you there. I never knew how to pronounce that until now. Thank you.
Although that might start an argument. It's Netsky. I think it's Netsky-P anyway. Okay. I see we've got value early. We've solved it all. And I remember seeing this campaign, and one of the variants was this really bizarre email that said, "We've got your kids," subject line. Social engineering brilliance, right? It's deeply emotive, it panics you, and we all know that when we're put in a panic situation, we're more likely to make bad decisions. So you panic, and when you read the body, it says, "We stole your kids after we dropped them off at school. After you dropped them off at school this morning. See the attached zip file, photos.zip, to know that we're telling the truth." Now, obviously, you open it up and there's invariably a payload of either some nasty malware or, in one case, a picture of a gorilla and some nasty malware. I was more left with, "I've got kids," as a reaction. but
I was thinking the same.
Yeah, I know as well. But of course, if you have children, that just plays to that deep kind of fear there. It's just enough to snare that click.
Well, recently there's been that one about I'm stuck in a foreign country and I need help, isn't there?
But you know what? My favourite one. That's been really popular. The Nigerian banking scam, the Nigerian prince.
Still going on.
There's one at the moment going around. The Nigerian prince in space. And he needs money to get back from space or it's going to get really serious. And I'm like, okay.
Nigerian princes in space.
Yeah. Now those traditional phishing scams, they're still being done because they still work, right? The goal, I think, of those particularly alarming, ridiculous scams is to filter down to a group of people that are more likely to hand over their information. Hasten to say, in some cases, maybe a tad gullible. We're actually, of course, seeing new phishing, new world phishing, which I think a lot of these examples are things that many of us could fall victim
Hey,
to.
I got my first Pokemon Go scam today.
Oh, that's
Anyone out there got the Pokemon Go? Oh, while I remember, we're going to have a quick poll later on. So Pokemon Go scam. Anyone out there had a Pokemon Go situation? Then let us know, and they'll appear on the questions, and then we'll find out if it was just me and it wasn't a scam at all, and they actually know about
Targeted.
Or
targeted, John.
Pokemon Go. It was actually marketing. So quick poll. You'll notice James is wearing a T-shirt. So on the big camera, notice James is wearing a T-shirt. And it has a chemical symbol on it. And so the question is it A, alcohol, B, urea, stuff that comes in, or C, caffeine? So answers on a question.
Or D, a new version of Pokemon.
Oh, it could be, yes.
Or, yes, the latest Pokemon Go character. I think we blew the chances for that one being an option.
D might get a sarcasm vote. But, go for that. Yeah.
So, as they say in French, returning to our sheep. These are, yes, they've been going on for a while, all of these scams, but the fact is now there's a whole industry behind them. Yep. And I know you've got a little story about showing a journalist some of this stuff. So
yeah, so
fill us in.
I've been, as I say, watching the cybercriminals for a long time now, and I remember 5 or 6 years ago seeing these pieces of software emerge, these crime packs and exploit packs, Neutrino, the black hole exploit pack, these pieces of software dedicated towards making it easy for cybercriminals to deploy malicious code. And I remember 3 years ago seeing one of the gangs introducing technical support as a service, and then seeing them move to the cloud. Because of course, no self-respecting criminal, in 2015 as it was, wants to buy on-premise software. Right? They're all about cloud solutions now when they're hacking people. So we've seen this kind of evolution of not just technical capability, but business capability. And I think
don't pay as you grow.
Yeah. Sometimes, when you have your head in the weeds of looking at exploits and reverse engineering interesting malware samples, as I tend to enjoy spending my time, you sometimes lose track of the bigger picture of some of those business innovations. And I was sat with a journalist, and this journalist said to me, "Take me to the dark web." And he actually used that voice. Which I love.
Mr. Anderson.
The dark web. Mr. Anderson. Superb. Which I think we should all start saying it like that, the dark web. Which, of course, to anyone watching this is just really the internet. And... I said,
there might be one or two politicians watching.
There you go. So the dark web. Yeah. So anyway, we fired up Tor in a browser, and we started looking at some of the more common sites where you could acquire people's information. And there are certain things you expect as a security researcher. You expect, credit card numbers to be on sale. Obviously, those are profitable. A few things that alarmed me. First off was this example here, seeing a comparison site that was rating each of the dark web markets where you could buy this information by commission, security features. Did they have two-factor authentication? Because of course cybercriminals care deeply about that kind of stuff.
That's right. They
very seriously.
Yeah.
Lead by example and all. Yeah. And when you actually dug into one of these markets, not only were they selling credit cards, but when you went to buy some of those credit cards, click, pay your bitcoins with escrow services, and recently added feature, Bitcoin tumbling, so they'll wash the money for you, so there's no trace. Yeah. Obviously that should be a service. They actually deliver an Excel file that's GPG encrypted, basically to a higher standard of security than most retailers would. When you click over to the accounts tab, they're selling email addresses for 0.25 cents Bitcoin equivalent. They're selling actual email accounts, usernames and passwords between $1 and $3, because that information alone is sufficiently interesting to scam your friends, colleagues, co-workers, to use you as a legitimate point of distribution of their scams. So for me, looking at this with this kind of reporter, it was this eye-opening moment of people think they're not a target. They think, why would I be interesting? I haven't got that much money. I haven't got this. I'm not a celebrity. Just an email account, a username and password, which we all have, makes
worth $1 to someone.
Worth $1 or $2 to a cybercriminal somewhere for opportunistic hacking. And with an excess of 350,000 new pieces of malicious code being generated every day, those are the ones we're seeing in our labs, sooner or later, you're going to run into this stuff.
And even if you are working in a small business and you think that your business might not be a target, you probably are now, because economically, because there is this marketplace, you've become a viable target for them in terms of cost versus opportunity. Never mind the fact that you might be in the supply chain of someone even more wealthy that would be a bigger target. So there are lots of ways that people can now be exploited. It's not just you and you alone. It's a community thing.
I mean, there's a massive irony here that the security grading available is actually far better than you get on your average website if you go and buy something. So the security people are treating themselves with more respect than our retailers are treating us.
I think there may be a slight differential of the effort that a consumer is prepared to go to adopt security practices with the cyber criminal. When it signs up, you've got to choose a PIN, a complex password, submit a GPG key that you've got and generated, which is, well, it's not an arduous task, but I can't exactly imagine asking my mother to go through that in order to go and buy something online, from Amazon or alike. So that there is a bit of a differential there, but you're right. The net result is a pretty impressive standing of security and data protection when they're shopping around their stolen credit cards. Yeah.
It's very interesting that people still get unhappy if you make security too complex for them. It's one of those issues we had, on previous slides. If you make security hard, people try and get around it unless they understand why it's important. And we still haven't really got that out to the vast majority of users inside business, and certainly not to the consumer community as a whole.
This is a dilemma, though. I mean, dilemma, by the way, one of my favourite words, dilemma. It literally means two theories. And in this case, opposing.
The word of the day, is it?
Word of the day.
Yeah, dilemma.
Well, we had a better word earlier, but I can't remember. So dilemma will be the word of the day for today. So try and use it in everything that you do and say. But the situation is that both people want security, but they don't want to do the things that security needs.
Yep,
That's
absolutely.
what it boils down to.
Yeah, and there can be more complex expressions of that. I mean, one of the distribution mechanisms we haven't talked about, obviously there's email and these scams that we're exploring now, but there's also the major mechanism cybercriminals have used for the last 5-6 years, which is drive-by downloads, exploiting the web browser, mainly giving Flash, Java, PDF a really bad day. Those have been the major mechanism where you hit a legitimate web page, nasty exploit code triggers, and you end up with something running in the background. There have been a bunch of pretty remarkable systematic improvements in modern operating systems to generically thwart these kind of memory corruptions and exploit conditions. And you could reel off a whole wealth of wonderful acronyms. Oh, I like that.
Acronyms.
Anachronisms?
An old acronym.
Yes, I like that. Great concatenation.
If that wasn't the word of the day, then it should have been.
It should have been.
Yeah.
There you go. We get that in the dictionary. But things like control flow guard in Windows 10, an amazing invisible mitigation that most users will never know is there, that's hardening the foundations. So there's been a lot of really good stuff. But this whole anti-exploit thing is a remarkable example of this. There are pieces of software like Microsoft's EMET, the Enhanced Mitigation Experience Toolkit, that generically thwart a lot of this stuff. And it's not the leading example, right? There are better anti-exploit capabilities with nicer policies, but it's quite good. It came out years ago, and very few people use it because they first deployed it, had a bad experience, went, ooh, that's going to be hard from a policy perspective, and never went back.
The other part of this is that a lot of the places that get infected in the first place in the web are running under really tight economic issues, and they think that even spending 30 seconds extra on security has an economic cost because they're doing so much of it every day, and that gets in their way. So there's still the cost element of security still in many people's minds, particularly in highly competitive environments, things like placing adverts and stuff like this.
Well, there's two costs there, isn't there? One is the cost of the security, and the other is the cost of, if it's going to take a customer 10 seconds more, maybe the customer would choose the place that's 10 seconds less.
Yeah. And
through
but it's
laziness.
also, they haven't cottoned on to the risk element of it. What happens to us if someone exploits this? So far, we haven't had that feedback from the consumers hitting the suppliers of the web services enough.
I mean, we're in a brave new world, right? I mean, you remember we used to be kind of sitting there in the dark depths of IT going, I wish people would pay attention to us and we could talk about our security stuff. And systematically over the past few years, data breaches in the headlines, regulations, I mean, you name it, we've had everything to project us into the center core of attention of the public, of businesses generally. But I don't think we've ever been at such a high point of awareness and yet struggled so much to get the right practices instilled.
Fate is not without a sense of irony.
A sense of irony, yes.
Indeed.
There's a subtle twist there. There's providence in the fall of the sparrow.
Yes, indeed. I think the issue is becoming now the kinds of threats. I mean, essentially ransomware. It's about, yes, all of that, and it can do direct damage. And
lasting damage.
Lock you out of your own building,
right,
as it were.
Yeah, I mean, ransomware, as you said, has really been the kind of favourite campaign of the cyber criminals of the last little while. Taking over from fake AV, you remember when that was everywhere? That delicious irony. Well, yeah, it's still around, but it used to be the big campaign with that delicious irony of using security to bypass security, very effectively taking on a position of authority.
Oh, this was the one, you have a virus.
Yes. Right, exactly. And it instills that panic, and you're like, I must do something about this. I've been told about when I get a virus. Click. So it takes over from that. And what I find amazing about ransomware, and we should be clear, it's not new, right? It's been around for a long time, but it's experiencing a major kind of increase in popularity, is how they found a threat model that impacts nearly everyone. They don't need to know why you care about your data or even what your data is, but it's a reasonable assumption that you do care about it and will pay money for it. And that's quite brilliant. I hate to compliment cyber criminals because it does upset me greatly, but it's a clever campaign.
So it's working on that fear.
It's understanding people again, from the opposite perspective, and working out how can you get people to do what you want them to do.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't surprise me if they didn't have literally psychologists and people like that involved in the supply chain somewhere, coming up with new ideas. There will be money in it.
They've made some amazing kind of leaps and bounds in their maturity of their technology and their approach over the last few years. As I said, ransomware is not new, right? It's been around for a long time. If you go back to some of the earlier ransomware samples, just when this was getting popular, you'd see these wonderful examples of unbelievably terrible use of crypto. Right? It was textbook how to get it wrong. And you'd go find the single key that was used on every installation. And once you extracted that with a bit of reverse engineering, you could go and decrypt everything. It's like, what we'll do is we'll have a key per computer. And then they'd store it in an obvious place, and you have the age-old chicken and egg problem of needing to protect a key, but what do you protect it with? How's it reversible? To today, where we're actually seeing some of these campaigns making proper use of PKI, where if you don't end up intercepting those keys when they're first generated, and if you know that's happening, you may as well be blocking the ransomware anyway, that data is in a position of fundamentally being irreversible, even if you do have all of the combined supercomputing powers of nation states at your disposal.
So it's like a complete history of cryptography played out through ransomware.
Right. And I have to say...
key management.
And key management. I have to say, some of these ransomware samples are doing a better job of implementation of crypto and the model of how you implement it compared to many mobile applications that many of us trust with our personal information. And that's quite scary. Right? Because now you're in a scenario where you pay or you lose your data, and there isn't going to be, we'll just reverse engineer it and write a tool for you to decrypt that. That's going away due to the fundamental laws of mathematics and modern computing.
So you really are stuffed.
Right, unless
with modern ransomware, you really are stuffed. Which we'll get onto the preparation in a minute. I don't want to steal the thunder of the second half of this webinar. But if you don't prepare, you really are stuffed, because you are not going to be able to decrypt your own data on your own machines,
right?
As
indeed.
it were. Right.
So the other interesting thing I just wanted to bring up quickly was about this distribution mechanisms for malware. We talked a little bit about exploits, people clicking on links. That's really the beginning of the campaign traditionally, where you end up at something that is an exploit. what's really interesting is it feels like the 90s again. Document-based malware.
Email is still one of the biggest threat vectors. Absolutely.
Yeah, and combine that with a document, which people don't think of as like a zip file or an executable. I mean, it's a document, and it's
this is macros and all that stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
And a lot of there are documents out there that contain exploits. Right. There have been certain gangs that have done really quite amazing levels of distribution with an exploit from 2014 that should be long patched. There's an object confusion attack in RTF. I think it was a list override count object or something. And that should have been patched a long time before, but they were being quite successful at distributing it. A lot of the modern campaigns now, no exploit. It is very simple macro code that, when run, either goes and grabs the malware and executes it, or contains an obfuscated form of it in a wonderful collection of different arrays that it shuffles around, deobfuscates, and runs. So it's a really simple loader, and it entirely depends on the user bypassing their security by clicking that enable content button. And this is... Please.
No, do carry on, but I've got a question for Tony. I remember back in the day, in the 90s, when it was the kind of macro-based Word document exploits and all that, and I can't remember the names of any of them because I'm getting old. But at the time, and Microsoft had to kind of really cough up a bit of money and actually start investing in security at the time, because most people said, look, Microsoft, it's your fault, it's your problem, you need to sort it out. Why can't we just say, hey Microsoft, hey whoever's providing our Office applications now, sort it?
We've made applications really complex animals now. Back in the 90s, the average Office suite probably had, I don't know, a 10th, a 50th of the functionality it has now. And the capabilities embedded in all business applications is just huge, and it keeps on growing and growing. Ironically, at a time when very few people actually exploit most of it, but that's always been the way with technology. So we still get caught out with this, and it's really hard to get people to take things away. Even when people are upgrading software, you can try and pass on responsibility for many things to third parties, your suppliers, your software companies, whatever. But the reality is it's still down to the individual and the company.
So can we blame Microsoft?
You can't really blame anybody.
Oh, mate.
But it's fun. but there was that period where you could look at their operating system model and say, but what about this? These are bad security decisions, and there are ways to do exactly the same thing, the same functionality, better. And you look at, let's take exploit control as an example. A modern operating system, address space layout randomization, data execution prevention, right? Avoiding use of null pointer dereferencing, low fragmentation, heap stack cookies, kernel pool cookies, virtual table pointer
buffer overruns.
Right. I mean, a lot of that stuff is fundamental. Yes, that was good. Fist pump.
We've basically trained people over the course of the last 15 years how to write better apps.
Right.
So starting off from that context that there are better ways of doing it, we've spent a lot of time doing that, but of course things have moved on. So now you've got to learn the same skills again in different contexts.
So in the old days, yes, software could be a problem. Yes, the operating system could be a problem. Yes, people could be a problem. And now those things are more and more complex, but they've been better written, but people are still... we haven't reprogrammed
We've raised the bar,
ourselves,
but the point is that the cyber criminals have raised their bars too. So it's a race. It's an arms race.
I mean, if you take Windows XP and Windows 10, I was going to go for Vista as the first where some of these controls started really appearing, but of course no one actually used that. So we'll go to 10. With Windows XP, if you have a vulnerable piece of software, and people are still writing bad code, right?
And
I
they're still
think we're better at that than ever before.
And there's still XP out there. We did a webcast on that last year.
Absolutely. So you go to XP, you take a piece of software, you find a potential buffer overflow. Let's keep stack-based buffer overflow, something simple. In XP world, that's pretty simple. There's nothing in your way. In a modern computing world, these modern operating systems, there are all kinds of checks and balances which can make it impossible to actually use that vulnerability to exploit. You need exactly the right alignment at the start, and those alignments come up. I mean, look at all these nasty bugs in Flash that have been able to get around the latest mitigations in operating systems, but the bar is higher. So I think that's improved a great deal, but we can't lose sight of the fact that security is again, a cliche, but one I believe in, a combination of people, process, and technology. Microsoft have raised the bar on the operating system and the fundamental mitigations, but the policies you apply to business, what you can and can't do, what you can and can't copy to USB keys, those are things that require an expression of policy and an understanding and commitment to security that I think requires focus and specialism. In a way, a major vendor focusing on writing OS code would be
more importantly, it also requires the business, the organisation, to be willing to actually implement management, managing people. Because it's one thing having these policies, but again, as we said, if people think it's getting in the way, they'll try and find a way around it. It's why education is really so important, that people understand the whys, not just the whats.
Plus, we're better at it.
Document distribution, we covered that. Yeah, it's
we just have this one example that I think is really quickly interesting, because I think it shows how convincing they are. This is a suppliers form. Some of the major campaigns at the moment, aside from Pokemon, which we'll see shortly, is focused around payment remittances, invoices. This one says it's a supplier's form, you need to fill it out. It's hoping to catch someone that's dealing with a supplier, and it's brilliant social engineering. At the top of the document it says, the content of this document has been encrypted, it's blurred out until you click enable content to enable security. So it's using security to make you click the button that deploys the malware.
It's brilliant because it's so dull.
It's so dull and it's so inane. It doesn't seem like the Nigerian print. It slips under the radar.
In space.
And what I really love about it is the idea that encryption is so similar to a Photoshop Gaussian blur. I think that's amazing. But you can see how that would snare the clicks of potentially even a few IT people at a bad moment, right?
It's not just a supplier form. It could be any form that people get coming into them. We've had examples of expense claims being used,
very popular.
Things like this. So it's all about the social engineering side, knowing enough about people to make it work. And again, you can fire it out to lots and lots of different people, but again, it's just going to hit the right one. It doesn't matter if you send the same thing out to 1,500 people who have nothing to do with suppliers or with expense refunding. You've just got to find the person that does.
Yeah,
I think this is fascinating because essentially it's saying, sure, exploit fear, sure, exploit desire, but it also just exploit the mundane.
It's process.
This is what I do all day. Alarms,
exactly.
Right? The short email that just says, "Hey, I'm coming into town. Can you pick a slot on the calendar?" from a supposed colleague. Far harder to spot those stereotypical grammar mistakes, dodgy links, bad graphics, the spoofed email address.
Sent from mobile.
Right. It just looks like a standard business.
Send it from a young person. And it wouldn't be surprising. I'm sorry, young people. That was
You're going to get lambasted for that.
Just by the way, we want to move on to the so what to do about it section of the webinar. Before we do, I'd like to say we've had thousands of responses to our poll. Questions 1, 2, 3, which of course were alcohol, and caffeine, and of the 1,000 which I can see on the screen right here, well actually there were 4, so I can add them up very quickly. All 4 responses said caffeine, so well done guys, and if I knew you better I'd send you a register mug, so if you can find me I'll get you a mug.
You can put caffeine in.
So thank you and well done, and I hope that lightened the mood, as caffeine should. So essentially, we want to look at what the challenges are, how to solve it, etc., etc. But I think what we realised as we were talking this through in advance was you've got to see it in terms of the bigger picture of security. You can't just say let's sort malware. You've got to say let's sort security. So while malware has clearly got a specific need to be solved, ransomware a very specific need and very dangerous and damaging to businesses of all sizes, how to put it in the context of the bigger security picture is very important.
Well, it's interesting. This is from a survey that we did with the Register audience probably about 1.5 years ago, where we asked, well, where are your priorities for actually securing things? And mobile wasn't exactly new then. Tablets were not exactly new then, but you can still see that the priority was very much focused inside the enterprise at desktops and laptops. The traditional targets for security in-house. But clearly, the actual role of mobile devices has spread enormously, and it's so much a part of everything that people do now. Almost, we ran some surveys recently where I think it was something like only about 5 or 10% of organisations said that they have staff that don't make any use of mobile as part of daily business life. Whether that's just it.
I was going to say, that's impressive.
I was going to say, well, it could be my mum. It's so much now part of ingrained everything we do. But we don't see still a big focus on security there, either from the vendor community, but certainly not inside the organisations on how to protect this, and getting the people elements covered again so that they understand what to do, what not to do, how to look after things. And beyond that, there's this thing that we've touched on sort of, as being part of the whole malware side of things, the cloud, using cloud resources to actually do that. Well, organisations are obviously using more and more external resources as part of their business. And getting, security sorted out there. You can see from the chart here that already, nearly half said that it was at least, an unwanted distraction, if not a major problem. And that's going to expand as we use them more.
Are we ever running behind the curve? Is this an unsolvable problem?
I think that given the nature of how software is produced, the nature of business, all the new technologies we're bringing in, the increase in pace, I don't think this problem is ever really going away. But I think still there's a lot we could do to shift the balance significantly. I still go to a lot of organizations in a breach scenario, and you ask the standard questions: where is your incident response policy? What procedures did you follow? And they give you a document that has a paragraph that says, talk to John. And John left a year ago. And there's kind of no protocol for what we do if we need to. And then you look at the security controls, and there's a bit of AV, some patching, a half-followed password policy, and maybe a web gateway, and that's about it. Right? And the modern world of security controls, there are so many additional layers that you can build up on top of that. And I know that sounds a lot like defense in depth, which is a painful kind of memory for us, but in truth, that's kind of what we're talking about, building up more layers so the holes get smaller that cybercriminals can get in and out of. And for me, the big reason we still have a lot of these more overt campaigns that are eminently detectable and blockable working is because the industry as a whole hasn't focused on making these new security controls actually adoptable. What's the point of the latest shiny anti-exploit or HIPS capability or DLP, if I even hasten to go there, if it's got so many policy controls and sliders and dials that not even an IT security expert who's already really busy can actually figure out how to make the thing work? You've got to make it easy.
Is the Sophos stuff easy to make work, James?
I think so.
Let's hope.
But I do believe, I mean, it is one of our focus areas, but I do believe making things easier is absolutely critical. That's why AV is adopted.
Absolutely
you turn it on, it blocks bad stuff. Other controls need to work like that.
We find, time after time after time, and we refer to it all the way through these slides, that the people issue is paramount. If you make stuff too difficult, they'll find a way around it. That must be the 4th or 5th time I've said that today.
Not with malintent. Right?
No, it's just
trying to do their jobs.
If it gets in the way, we get around it. To a degree, with the same in IT, we wanted to do encryption for a long time. It was, the overhead of doing it for a time was so much that it was a problem. But still now, even today, you can do the encryption reasonably well without too big an overhead hit, because the processing power is readily available everywhere, even on phones.
AES acceleration on chips.
Exactly. Yes. But still, things like key management get in the way. How do we look after this stuff, for considerable periods of time and make it easy for people to do without being perceived as getting in the way, unless we educate them that, okay, we might be adding, 1 extra click or 2 extra clicks to your routine, once or twice a day, but here's the reason why. Understand it. We've got to address those people issues. Fundamental.
And that's saying, don't think about the technology so much as, the people are a challenge, right? But equally, I guess, and I'm going to flick onto the next slide, it's not about the technology as well in terms of the problem we're trying to solve. It's about, ultimately, if the business ain't going to lose money on it, who cares? If it's not going to be in breach of regulation, etc., etc.
You've got to understand your risk profile.
I've had conversations with people around risk. very recently, in fact, in very risk-aware organisations, and they still say that sometimes when we tell people implementing the security we need to do on this or that we should do on this is going to add an extra 4 weeks to a project, which today sounds like half the universe lifetime.
It's not very agile, is it?
Exactly. And they say, well, okay, well, what's the chances of any risk that we might not clear if we don't take those extra 4 weeks happening? And how can you possibly measure that one, guys? That's impossible. So what are the consequences if that risk is exploited? And the business people then say, okay, we'll take it. Which maybe you can get away with for a time, but eventually that's going to have an impact on the business. It's getting all of these elements combined together so that people understand them. It's a big picture.
Well, what I'm reading from this particular picture is the fact that any one thing is, yeah, sure, it's you can kind of say, well, does it really matter? Does it really matter? And the answer is, well, none of them really matter by themselves, but you put them all together, and yeah, probably the company's going to be damaged quite significantly at some point in the immediate future.
There's significant prospect here of potential catastrophic impact, and I don't want to be the hype-mongery, hand-waving security guy, because there are plenty of those. But
you just did a very good job.
I did. I think it should have been more animated still. A few coffees, and we would have, we would have been there. Yeah. But take ransomware as the prime example we've been discussing here. There are ransomware campaigns out there now. The cyber criminals have stopped operating, or their infrastructure's been shut down. And if you run into their sample and it infects your systems, you can't pay them to get the data back. Right? There are samples where they screwed up the implementation, maybe on purpose, but they screwed up the implementation. They ask for money, you can pay them. The data can never be decrypted. It basically shreds things. Now, you have to assess the risk of that happening to you, but across all your employees, all your systems, the odds of that piece of code ending up on a computer that's connected to the filer on the network, that's what we would, in risk terms, even if we decide it's improbable, it's very high impact.
This reminds me of the scene in Red Dwarf where what about so-and-so? Yeah, he's dead too, Dave. They're all dead, Dave.
All dead, Dave.
What about that bit of data? What about that server? It's empty, Dave.
And this is fundamental to that fourth round circle at the top there, lack of air cover. And investment, and people getting to understand, well, what are the consequences now? They could be potentially catastrophic. And it might not be just in terms of ransomware. It could be, someone deliberately targeting your organisation. If they've got the skills to get into
businesses,
this.
Ultimately, it comes down to money, doesn't
Absolutely.
it? So,
but being able to accurately profile your risk and having security at the table, at that position of air cover, where you can really take a good hard look at your security model, your risk as a business. Are you likely to have a competitor spend a few $100s hiring a hacker, because it's barrier to hiring when I was very low, coming after you? Having that discussion and then choosing your security program is of course the right way to do this. For a small business, a lot of that discussion can't occur. They're trying to focus on making their pizzas or whatever it is they do. That's where you come down to just a kernel of simple best practice. And the truth is, with a lot of these campaigns, if you take the 10 simple things that we've all ranted about over the last few years, you'll find plaster all over lots of websites, we'd be in a lot better position.
So come on, let's look at them. Let's
bring in some ransomware ones as well.
So specific on ransomware.
Yep.
What to do to make sure that this doesn't happen, or that you're protected in any way.
First, tactical things, but really useful tactical things for ransomware. Like document-based malware using macros is a massive, massive trend. Do you need macros? Some people do, a lot don't. You could disable them by policy, and that's going to make a lot of those documents inert.
And train the people that do use macros what to look for.
Right. Oh, a good tactical one on top of that. There's the Microsoft Office Viewer apps. And you can set those to the defaults by policy to open things from email, and they don't support macros. So you can look at a document in an email client, and short of an exploit, which is a more rare condition that gets patched, that's going to make again those documents inert. So that's pretty effective as well. Standard good old patching, keeping things up to date. I know it's not sexy, I know it's boring, but there's still a lot of people being exploited by flaws in Office software from 2014 and earlier. I think people have learned a lot about updating browsers. Many manufacturers or vendors of those browsers have made it automatic, but that's definitely something you need to look at, the broader ecosystem of security.
This is kind of Windows oriented. Do we need to think of Mac.
Yeah, this is a little
versions of
Windows
Office?
oriented. There certainly is Mac malware, even Linux, although it's far less widespread. A lot of the same practices can really be applied to Macs fundamentally. The only other thing I'd add on ransomware as a specific one is a lot of the time now there are specific detection routines for ransomware, and you want to make sure that is turned on. Think about it. What does ransomware do? There's a million different files. There's a million's a slight, exaggeration of uniques, but dramatization.
You're always exaggerating.
Yes, it's so big. It was that. There's a lot of ransomware files out there. Lots of new variations. It's easy for them to change, but when it comes down to it, they access files one after the other, applying crypto-esque operations, often using the Windows Crypt API. It's an incredibly predictable behavior. Identifying that pattern and halting the damage early, saying, no, this process is not allowed to do that. Damage containment, good strategy. So look to do something like that for ransomware on a particular basis.
It's getting the best practice sorted out fundamentally.
Yeah. Now, of course, there's more than... That's just the ransomware tactical stuff. On a broader basis, you've said it, education is important. We make security products. Technology is an important part of it, but user awareness, making sure people are human sensors in the organization is an incredibly valuable task as well.
And unfortunately, it's something that organizations don't want to do, because we've seen in almost all area of business that education budgets have been cut enormously over the last 10, 15 years, and it's really difficult to get hold of that. Even just spending time going around telling people about this stuff, that organizations just don't see the value in it. I do not understand it, I really don't, given everything else that we've talked about.
And perhaps the one thing they can be educational on the most is backups.
Backups.
Yes.
We should talk about backups.
Yes. You may have heard me rant about backups more than one webcast.
Is this a passionate subject?
I'm
of
afraid
yours?
it is. I mean, we've been doing backups badly for a very, very, very long time, and we still do backups badly. And when we talk to the register audience, they tell us that we still have challenges. But something that's happened more recently has been that some of the newer storage solutions start talking about just doing replication as being enough. You don't need to do backups
Like
anymore
Dropbox.
now. We can just do snap copies of everything.
You can replicate all of your ransomware encrypted files.
Exactly, and this is why you need things like air gaps between your backups and everything else, so that if you do get infected, you've got something that's not network connected.
Or implicit
to go back
versioning is another good thing as well, right? If you commit and you overwrite those encrypted copies, but you have versioning that goes back a reasonable period of time, that can be effective.
Which Dropbox and other cloud stuff
you can do. But I think it's only in the enterprise version, or you pay in the... I might be wrong about that.
Well, look into it. I mean,
someone will tell us.
Need to know the answer.
Most of them, well, certainly the bigger ones do implicit versioning automatically, and that can be very useful. I'm not quite sure how far back they go. And some of the more sophisticated attacks now are, getting themselves ready to encrypt and then just, retrospectively activating it rather than having it go bang on day one when it lands to show you this stuff.
If I was a cyber criminal, I would think of re-encrypting 3 times if it's three versions that you keep.
I wish I had a beard right now.
Yeah, but that's the thing. You've got to be very careful.
Stroking his cat.
But backups have always been important. The IT guys out there know that.
Which is business continuity, right?
But again, it's getting it right and making it simple enough. And the backup companies have done a lot on that recently. So you've got backup appliances now and things like this that do try to make it simpler to do. But the point is that you've really got to make sure that you've got the air gaps in here. The potential use for tape there alone is, obvious. You've got tapes. It's really hard to infect a tape, except at the time when you're writing them. So if you've got tapes going back far enough, you may not save all of this week's work, but at least you've got last week's and everything from before that. So really have a look at your backup strategy and make sure that it is applicable. And maybe it might bring, the priority for doing backups as part of security, not just part of DR.
And I think a small modicum of preparation here is going to save you, aside from the business stuff, as an IT person, is going to save you a lot of heartache and late nights in the future. I have been in those incidents where something like this happens and you go to the backups and they aren't viable
Have you seen
And it
many
was a
incidents,
checkbox.
James?
I've seen things
Yeah.
you wouldn't believe.
He's always there.
Yeah.
You know, he's always there at all the incidents. Coincidence?
With my
Saying.
USB key.
Well, in some parts of the world, USB keys is almost as common a form of infection.
Still happens a lot.
Yeah, I mean, you found a USB key in the car park. Does someone just plug it into your machine?
Still happens a lot.
I've never done that.
I have never.
I mean, there's the irony that's kind of percolating through my veins at the moment is the fact that a lot of this stuff is solvable, a lot of this stuff is preparable for, and it does come back again and again and again to awareness. And yeah, sure, this is a big complicated slide with lots of jigsaw pieces, but ultimately it's that 90% figure in the corner that's...
It's the worrying one, isn't it? But that's it, you know, if people think it gets in the way, unless they understand why it's in the way, then it's a challenge. You've got to get that employee resistance to go, and it goes with the exec level awareness as well. Yep, certainly they are more aware of the threat landscape now than ever before, but have they yet associated that with the real business risk that we're talking about and the potential consequences of that if it should happen? It might be a very low chance, but you know, the impact if it does. And getting people to just think about that and then make budget available to do something on it and make resources available to do the training, to do the awareness, even if it's just 10 minutes a week, or just getting people to read something at the login screen to remind them about training.
The only little thing I'd add, I'm cognizant of the fact that we, over the last few minutes, it could sound like we're saying IT security people are lazy. They haven't bothered to do this stuff. And we've got to remember, right, a lot of people, particularly small businesses, let's use them as the example. There's the IT people guy who's also the security guy.
And the backup guy.
Also the backup guy who's fixing the printer, who's running around everywhere, keeping everything working.
And doing the updates on the Office programs.
And so you can understand why this web of things that we've talked about.
I will get round to it. We need a security round to it, don't we?
It's tough, right? It is tough. It's often under-resourced.
Yeah. And it's the resourcing really that's key to everything here. Getting people ready to invest that time in understanding the problem. Just to start, we're working out, well, what are these half a dozen things that we can do that will make it better? It's not quite the same as the old thing of having the three guys on the savannah in Africa with the lion there, and one of them turns around and starts running, and they say, you can't outrun the lion. Well, I don't have to outrun the lion, I've just got to be faster than you. There are elements of that in here, but you can make it better and at least get further away from the lion so that he's got more to catch up with you.
It's called a race. That's happening.
There's a lot of money to be made for anyone that makes this stuff really easy for the CEO to understand, isn't it? If you could just go, yeah, I get it. We're screwed unless we do these right things.
I think it's accessibility and simplicity across the board. I've made a thing of it over my career in security. Taking really technical, meaty stuff and trying to make it simple, I think, is a key to a lot.
That would be your intro to business case. Just make it simple, make it understandable.
I've read penetration test reports where the executive summary starts with, this particular corruption enables us to get control of this location and find kernel 32 DLL via the process environment block. You've lost. Right? You've lost with a lot of technical people. Right? Business impact, simple, risk articulation. It's hard, but it's so necessary.
It's something that we as an industry have always done very badly. We can talk about the technology, but not what it means to the people that are actually doing the funding. And
it's not just in the communication. It's in terms of with management, it's in the policies, it's in the technology that we use. Vis-a-vis my earlier rant, it's throughout. Right, we've got to make the stuff accessible for people that aren't us.
And again, keep aware of how things are changing, because the threats change, literally within seconds. And so finding the time, that resource element again, so that the people that are educating the end users, hey, look, something's happened in our particular industry vertical because we've heard about it from someone else. Be aware of this. Make it a news item, so that someone's got responsibility for doing
maybe
that.
Regulation can be your friend. I don't know.
Right. Well, I mean, you look at our increasingly stringent regulatory environment. We kind of led the charge back in 2003 when HMRC lost all those all those records, 25 million records, wasn't it, I think, on
Bless.
CDs in the post.
Yeah.
But it was a trusted transfer mechanism.
I never found them.
No, they don't think they ever turned up, did they?
No.
Doesn't mean they haven't been found.
True. We pushed the boundaries. There was breakneck legal reform, which I think the legal industry's definition of breakneck speed versus technology might be.
I think I heard someone trying to play one as a backing track on the X Factor.
Trying to imagine what that would sound like. It's the Doctor Who theme tune. Regardless, I mean, we've had all this legal reform. We're on the cusp of new regulations. These regulations are being pushed through the Article 29 Working Party in Europe, irrespective of what now happens to us as a country as we go through this path. My theory is we'll at least meet those to trade with Europe, if not choose to be more aggressive to show that we really care about our data. That regulatory environment leads to a place where the failure to meet a certain level of best practice, when you come to these retrospective sanctions and the Information Commission or whoever is banging on your door, failing to meet that standard puts you in a category of potential negligence to act. As opposed to being a victim.
200 quid fine wasn't really enough.
And you could be a victim, right? You could do anything right.
The negligence to act applies to who? The executives in charge of the company, not to the IT guys. But it's the people running the business.
I'm thinking of that, and I'm thinking ransomware itself is essentially, I mean, we can all talk about sort of security breaches could damage the business and talk and standard examples about costing a million quid of it. But ransomware essentially, it can bring the business to a complete halt, can't it? It's
very tangible, right? I mean, particularly these modern examples where technically there is nothing you can do except pay. And let's remember, there are also those scenarios where you can't pay. So I think it's a very tangible scenario to focus on security with the executive.
So if you're going to stop nothing else, stop ransomware.
And it's the big campaign at the moment. And sadly, when people start thwarting it more, the cybercriminals will move on to their next technique.
And that's why you need to keep aware of how things are changing.
So with those, because we're starting to wrap up now, we've got a few minutes left, and I'm just going to throw out one last slide, but we're not necessarily going to talk through the whole thing. But essentially, let's use this as a backdrop to what last advice we give everyone. How would we wrap this all up into a summary? Perhaps I'll go to you first, Tony, and say, where should people start? What should be the kind of priority thing that they should think about?
Well, backups first, right? Because that's the easy step. And calling backups easy is maybe a bit of a contradiction in terms, but technically, compared to educating the board, it's much simpler. So backups will be one, but
depends on the board and the backup.
But then it's really about getting that awareness at all levels in the company. I think that they're the most important fundamental things you can do to get resource available to do something about this. Whether it's improve your backups or just do better security, and keep that awareness raised. Getting the business execs to realise that it's their neck on the line. When we've again run surveys with the register audience, we've asked questions along the lines of, given that we all know that security really is an executive level issue, or falling all the way through to individuals in the company, where in reality does it reside? And almost everybody says that we carry the buck, the IT guys carry the buck. So I think that in this case we've got to make sure that these business execs really understand that it's their neck on the line.
It's a business problem.
It's a business problem.
End of the day. James,
forgive me. So I'm the geek T-shirt. So forgive me for being tactical, but I think it's timely with so much ransomware being successful. Take a moment out of your day to go and grab those basic best practices, things like disabling the macros or restricting them, the viewer applications, keeping those particular branch of applications up to date. Some of those small little changes are things that you could do quite quickly and easily that would massively reduce your threat surface area against those particular campaigns. And more broadly, I've seen a lot of occasions where people had the controls to stop an attack they were hit by, and they weren't turned on, they weren't activated, because they're kind of stuck in the runaround keeping everything working. I know it's hard. Find a little bit of time to go and check those out. Look for things like that new process of detecting ransomware generically by behavior. Those things could save you a lot of late nights.
So these are ransomware stitches in time, basically.
Yeah, I think that's the real focus at the moment, and it's a great way to kind of laser focus the board on some of these issues, And it's also a nice opportunity to deal with broad education with end users, looking around things like modern phishing campaigns, and maybe it isn't going to be the Nigerian prince from space. Maybe it is going to be a payment or remittance. I don't want to email that guy.
We're going to have to wrap up. I put up some links that James has put up on the screen now, and I asked in advance if there are any I should highlight. So look out for bit.ly/29 capital RCXGK if you're listening in, and that is I know it's snappy, isn't it?
So snappy.
So that's the one. Without further ado, one last point. I've had a request from Graham to send him a mug, so because I'm nice, it may not arrive in one piece, but I'll see what I can do. And it just remains for me to thank our panelists, to James and to Tony, and I hope you enjoyed that, and look forward to tuning in with you next time. Cheers.